We begin this hour with breaking news and a busy Saturday for President Biden on the world stage. Right now, the president is in a bilateral meeting with France's Emmanuel Macron following a procession that the two leaders participated in on the Champs-Elysees earlier this morning. Biden and Macron are expected to deliver remarks later this morning. This is all part of the president's trip to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Allied invasion of Normandy in World War II. Throughout the visit, the president has emphasized the threat to dictators that they pose to our democracy, not just here at home, but also abroad. And those threats are as urgent as they were 80 years ago. Joining us now to discuss it all is staff writer for The Atlantic and MSNBC contributor McKay Coppins and former Homeland Security and Counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, Olivia Troye. Welcome to you both.
Welcome, everybody. Olivia, this was quite a week for President Biden to stand on the global stage in a way that he did, to talk about the urgency of this moment in democracy and relating it back to history. What was your take on what the president had to say, and how do you think it resonated, not just with our European allies, but here at home?
Olivia, you might be able to.
And a leader.
There we go.
I think he did an excellent job of being a statesman and a leader on the world stage. I think it was critical to show that face to the world and also to Americans. And I think, Michael, that what resonated with me was he did have sort of that Reagan-esque quality to him, and he did deliver that in his speech. And I thought it was important to talk about, the people that have served in the military, the lives that have been given for freedom, and that is really what's at stake here. I saw some criticism on Fox or other channels where they're like, why is he attacking Trump in this moment? He never mentioned Trump, right? He never mentioned him by name, I don't believe. But I think what he needed to say was that this is a bigger choice than just each and every one of us. It's a choice about what do we want our future to be as a country, and let's honor those lives that served for this country.
Olivia, I mean, the words of President Biden were so poignant and I thought spot on. Let's play a little bit of what he talked about when it comes to hardships of American democracy. This is the president in Normandy, France on Friday for the control room. It's E3.
We talk about democracy, American democracy. We often talk about the ideals of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. What we don't talk about is how hard it is, how many ways we're asked to walk away, how many instincts are to walk away. The most natural instinct is to walk away, to be selfish, to force our will upon others, to seize power, never give up. American democracy asks the hardest of things, to believe that we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
I mean, does anybody think Donald Trump could have given that speech? Alicia, I don't know.
It's a rhetorical question, correct, Simone? I mean, and McKay, it speaks to all of the reporting that you've been doing, which is it is impossible to watch President Biden on the world stage without doing a compare-contrast, not just us, people who show up on cable news, but as an American watching at home and certainly as an ally watching abroad.
Yeah, the themes that Biden is sounding in these speeches and throughout these events commemorating D-Day are very familiar themes from past administrations, frankly, in both parties, right? To Olivia's point, they sound in some ways like Ronald Reagan, like George H.W. Bush, even like George W. Bush, who was not a very popular president abroad. On certain things, there has been a bipartisan consensus in this country for a long time. One of those things is the importance of the transatlantic relationship and the fact that it is rooted in Western democratic values, a belief that America is supposed to align with other democracies and that alliance is a safeguard for the rest of the world. And what's interesting is that that speech that Biden gave would have been completely uncontroversial, even unmemorable, just a few short years ago. Now it is like, right in the middle of a massive domestic political debate about what role America should play in the world and what it owes to its allies. And so that compare and contrast is really stark this year.
Well, you touch on that, McKay, actually, in a great observation for the Atlantic. What Europe fears, the irony of Europe's obsession with the upcoming election, is that the people who will decide its outcome aren't thinking about Europe much at all. In part, that's because many Americans haven't seen the need for NATO in their lifetime, despite the fact that the September 11th terrorist attacks were the only time Article 5 has been invoked. You touch on a very important point about disconnection. And it actually, and ironically, it's something that George Bush 43 warned about on the heels of 9/11. We cannot forget this moment. We feel good. We are unified now. We understand we're standing in defense of our values, and we're prepared to prosecute the case against terrorism. But all of that is dissipated. That connection to those institutions that hold all of this together. And I think Biden being there and saying what he said was important. But you point up the fact that there's still this tension, this disconnect that needs to be reconciled between us and Europe, between our role in the world and the rest of the world, and how we as Americans look at these institutions.
So I was traveling throughout Europe this spring doing reporting, talking to European officials, diplomats, and the thing that kept coming up was this real sense of uncertainty about what America is anymore, right? Because for 75 years, since World War II, Europe, even when they disagreed with the people that we elected, even when they really didn't like certain administrations, they trusted in America to be a reliable ally, right? That America was the linchpin to the NATO alliance, that it was going to be a generally responsible member of the global community, right? And that first Trump term really did damage to America's reputation and to the trust that America could be relied upon. And again, I would kind of hear these European officials sort of ask me, like, what does it mean that Donald Trump is currently leading in the polls in your country? You know, like how many?
What's wrong with y'all?
Well, because they fondly remember the U.S. that stormed the beaches of Normandy, that liberated Europe. Like that is the Europe that the America that a lot of Europeans still remember, and they're wondering how many Americans still fondly remember that version of the U.S.
Right, and so to crystallize that point, Olivia, I want you to take a listen to this ad that Liz Cheney's PAC put out. It's called Our Great Task. Take a listen.
One's country is worth dying for, and democracy is worth dying for because it's the most deeply honorable form of government ever devised by man. All of you loved liberty. All of you were willing to fight tyranny, and you knew the people of your countries were behind you.
Today we give thanks for all that was gained on the beaches of Normandy. We remember what was lost with respect, admiration, and love. This freedom and these hopes are what the heroes of D-Day fought and died for.
America deserves a president as good and steadfast as our nation, a president of character, driven by a noble purpose, one who honors the sacrifices of our troops, not a man consumed by spite, revenge, and self-pity.
You don't need to say the name, Olivia, to know who it is that Liz Cheney is talking about there.
Yeah, you don't. And look, it reminds me of Trump just saying, that these people were losers. And every time I think about that a president of the United States would ever say that, my stomach turns. And watching that ad, I kept thinking about my time during the Trump administration working in national security. And I think what lacked among some of the inner circle, including with Trump himself, was a greater purpose of service. I don't think that any of these people, this inner circle I'm talking about, and his enablers and him, understood a greater calling, understood something that you belong to that is bigger than yourself and bigger than the selfishness of what some of these people exhibited, because most of them never did serve. They don't understand the military service. They don't understand the intelligence community. They don't understand public service. And so I think that is important to remind ourselves of what the President of the United States stands for and what they represent and what they'll eventually do. And like a reminder, we will likely pull out of NATO because those discussions were had during the Trump administration. And the reason that the world is concerned about what's about to happen should he return to office is because I was in those meetings when we were having serious discussions with foreign countries where the narrative would change on a daily basis, where the foreign partner would be sitting there. I thought we agreed to this, and then it would change. We did this on Venezuela. I'm telling you this because I covered Latin America for Vice President Pence. I covered Africa for Vice President Pence. I sat in these discussions where there would be a commitment made, and then they would pull the rug out from under him. That's not how you do diplomacy. That's not how you do these diplomatic relations that are so critical and so challenging.
I mean, Olivia, people at home may not appreciate fully what you are saying, because literally all diplomacy is a bunch of people saying, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that, and we come to an agreement. It is all about relationship and people keeping their word. That is it. And the not even just the idea, the fact. We often talk about it, but the choice, as Alicia noted, the stark choice that is before the American people, it couldn't have been made more clear today, this week, frankly, from what we saw from President Biden juxtaposed with the person who is the Republican nominee. I mean, the NATO was 80 years ago when D-Day happened. NATO wasn't established, right? It was the Allied troops that came together. The world came together, took the beaches of Normandy, and it was that time in Normandy that turned the tide to end World War II. It led to the establishment of NATO years later. It led to the establishment of the UN. And we are in an eerily similar moment. The president talked about linking D-Day to what's happening in Ukraine and the fight right now. I want to play that for you and have you guys talk on the other side.
The struggle between a dictatorship and freedom is unending. Here in Europe, we see one stark example. Ukraine has been invaded by a tyrant bent on domination. Ukrainians are fighting with extraordinary courage, suffering great losses, but never backing down. The United States and NATO and a coalition of more than 50 countries standing strong with Ukraine. We will not walk away.
McKay, it sounds to me like the president is standing in front of the world, trying to convincing people, trying to make everyone feel okay that as long as I'm here, we will be standing with Ukraine. But as the Time article said, about a week ago about American presidents, they must earn their mandate, and we don't know if Joe Biden will earn his.
Yeah, that's right. And again, going throughout Europe and talking to these European officials, the thing I heard again and again was, look, the Biden administration has been great, right? They are doing everything they can to say the right things. They're trying to reassure allies who were rattled during Trump's administration. But at the end of the day, the Biden administration can only do so much. And I even spoke to U.S. officials here in Washington in the Biden administration who said, look, we have our ambassadors out there trying to reassure allies. They've got their talking points. But these people in Europe are smart, right? They know that the promises that Joe Biden is making only go so far. And, because the outcome of the election is going to determine the future of America's approach to alliances.